Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented writer, Todd Fahnestock. Thank you so much for being here, Todd.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me.
So, let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career.
Sure. I started writing when I was 18 years old and just never stopped. I mean, like my initial reason to want to write when I was younger, my parents got divorced and I fell into escapism reading epic fantasy novels, right? I mean, that was how I kind of dealt with the thing that I didn't want to be happening around me. Like there's other kids would do other things. My brother like vandalized a pool hall. One of my friends that I knew like would beat up on people. Anyways, well, the thing that I did to deal with that was to read fantasy books, and it really helped me through that time. Um, I just kind of like it made that bridge for me to get from where I didn't really know what was going on and why I was hurting so much to okay, it all makes sense now that I'm 25. Looking back, uh, I'm sure lots of kids were going through that, but it made an indelible impression on me and my personality. And as I, kind of hit the end of high school and early college, like the coolest thing I could think of was making stories for maybe there would be some other teenager out there someday that was going through a tough time and used epic fantasy as this escapism to help them get through that tough time. And it seemed to me to be the best job in the world. So that's when I started writing and finished my first novel actually the summer after my senior year, and just never looked back. Like I just had to keep writing. Yeah, so that's kind of how it began for me. And then there was a certain turning point later in my 30s where I was like, okay, it's time to get serious about this, because I kind of dink and dunked with it for a long time. I was like, okay, I'm writing, and I'm not a real writer, but I'm just one of those guys that's writing in the background, and who knows whether I'll ever turn into something. And then when I was in my 30s, I got really serious. I was like, okay, I'm going to go after this in a professional way. That's when I started going to writers' conferences. That's when I started trying to get an agent. Eventually did get an agent, had, a 3-book auction for the big publishers in New York, and got a big publishing deal. And that kind of started the professional churning wheel that eventually took me to later on being an indie author, which I love so much. As you know, we met at a con where I was selling books, and yeah, and that's what I love. I love getting to the readers like face to face. That is something that I've really come to enjoy and appreciate. And I mean, on the one hand, it's like I'm selling books one at a time, but on the other hand, I'm selling books one at a time. Like I get to meet the person that's going to read the book and talk to them and let them know about my story. And so now that's what I do. I mean, in fact, I just got done with a month where I was in 3 cons over the course of that month. So essentially, I drove all the way out to Seattle, and then drove all the way back to Denver, then drove all the way out to Kansas City for Planet Comic Con, then all the way back to Denver, then all the way out to California, Anaheim to do WonderCon, all in 34 days. So it was like 34 days, and 28 of them or 29 of them I was on the road, right? And in the other 5 days or 6 days, whatever that would be, like I was prepping and loading the van and all of the stuff that I was doing. So it was pretty whirlwind month, but man, I love it. I get to meet the fans face to face. It's really cool.
That does sound fun though, because you get to also travel and like new places, right?
That's true. That's true. I mean, I had been to Seattle before, but I'd never really been to Seattle. I think I had touched boots on the ground when I was flying through at one point, and this time, I stayed downtown, got to see the beautiful convention center there. Got to walk around, go to a couple of the restaurants there. It was amazing. And then my son goes to school pretty close by there, so I got to drop down and hang out with him and meet a lot of his friends at college. That was kind of fun too.
Do you remember the first novel you wrote? The
Oh,
summer.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I the first novel I ever wrote um, was probably like the one that I wrote in high school was it never got published, and I don't even want to tell you the title of it because it was so bad. It was just I thought I was so clever back in high school. So here's the title. I'm going to tell you the title.
Yeah.
So it was called "The Tale of the Child Who Was Not." That was the title. So bad, so bad. So I call it the Cork novel because the main character's name is Cork, and that title was just so bad that I just had to just start calling it that in my head. But I never published that novel. I mean, it was good for a start, but it was this swashbuckling adventure of this guy that was like a really talented swordsman and then got involved in this higher level taking over of the continent by this evil force and just sort of slashed and quipped his way through this adventure where everybody else around him in his sort of D&D party was super serious and he was not. So anyways, that one will never see the light of day, but that was my first novel. That was the first one.
I feel like all the first stories people write as kids is like a complete parody of an already existing like story. So do you
Mm-hmm.
think yours was that as well, or was it completely original?
I mean, I it was it was the thing I wanted to be reading. Like when I first started writing it, I was like, I want an epic fantasy story with more action in it. That was the reason that I wrote that book because so many epic fantasy, if you ever read any epic fantasy, like so many epic fantasy stories, there's a lot of world building. And oftentimes they'll just get really thick and deep into the world building and they'll describe rolling fields and like ornate wooden cabinets and they'll just go on
Mhm.
describing things and as a teenager I was like no, I want it to move faster, I want it to go faster, and that's why I wrote that book. Interestingly enough, that's the way I lean at this point. My brand is edge of your seat epic fantasy. That's what I do. And of course, there's a lot more intricate world building and deep characters now when I write than there was probably back in high school. But still, I lean towards that really fast paced, lots of action kind of story.
So when you write your stories, do you focus on like creating the world first and then you make a story, or do you write a story and then build a world around it?
Excellent question. For me, it happens together. I feel that there is an organic connection between character, setting, and plot. And to build one all by itself doesn't make a lot of sense to me, which is one of the reasons like I don't like those protracted long descriptions of the whole setting. Like I want the setting to relate to the character. So if I'm going to be describing the setting, let's say there's a city, right? And the city has 7 towers, and those 7 towers are related to the 7 princes that settled the city in the very beginning, right? So if I'm going to describe that, it's going to be one of two ways, right? Either A, I'm, working with one of the characters is a prince now, either one of the 7 princes that founded it, or 2,000 years later, one of the descendants of these 7 princes, and that's how they describe it. Or it could just be some ordinary schmo, getting up and going to work at the stables, and he walks past the towers every day. And so as he's going to his job or whatever, the towers are moving past him and it will have something to do with his world. I like to look through the eyes of the character. So this guy that's going to the stables would be like, oh yeah, I remember when I had to come and clean up around one of these towers because the horses that we had rented out to somebody, they abandoned them there and they just pooped all over the place or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Something really ordinary that relates to the character, and then we get a feel for the tower in the background. And usually when I do that, there will be a reason. Usually I try. So I don't know if you know who Brad Bird is. He's a director he did Ratatouille, he did The Incredibles, he did The Iron Giant.
Oh my God, I
um,
love movies.
aren't they great movies? Every single
Yeah.
one of them. Brad Bird is fantastic. Anyways, so he's a fantastic storyteller, right? And
Mhm.
one of the things when I was watching The Incredibles, they had all these behind the scenes, the making of The Incredibles, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. One of the things that he took a line from Native Americans, which was use the entire buffalo. If you go out and you hunt the buffalo, you're going to use the hide, you're going to use the meat, you're going to use the intestines, you're going to use the bones, you're going to use every single part. But he
Mhm.
related it to storytelling. It's like if you're going to throw something into a story, don't just leave it hanging out there. You've already described this tower, one of these seven towers, right? Like use it for something in the story. Use the entire buffalo, right? And I just love the notion of that. That if you're going to introduce something into a story, it's kind of foolish not to use it at some point. And I'm not saying it has to be integral to the plot, right? It doesn't have to be this,
Yeah.
this amazing artifact around which all the action rotates, but you should utilize it as much as you can utilize it since you've already introduced it. So I love that too. Usually if something gets introduced in the setting or the plot or the character, it's going to be used by more than just the setting, right? So if it's setting, it's going to be used to define the character or perhaps to have an event for the plot. If it's plot, it's going to be used to elevate the setting and elevate the character, and vice versa. Like it's just like I said, this triangle of organically interweaving those three plot elements all the time whenever I can.
Then have you ever like removed something because you thought it was not tight enough or it was unnecessary?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a phrase, and I actually don't know who said it first. I know that Stephen King said it at some point, and there's lots of other authors that have said it, and probably before him. Kill your darlings is what they say. So as a writer, you write all these things, and there could be something that you just love the notion of, this little aside that you created, but it should always be in service to the story. And if it's just in service to you as the author and your catharsis, you just like it, you wanted it in there for whatever reason, you have to look at that and go, okay, is it serving the story or is it slowing the story down? Is it detracting from what you're trying to tell here, or is it adding to what you're trying to tell? So that's, and I've done my fair share, slaughtered my fair share of darlings, if I can put it that way. However, I will say this: as I've kind of become more of a seasoned author, you can usually find a place to use things like that if you want to spend some time lacing it in. If you have this thing that doesn't really fit into the story, there may be a place for you to weave it in. It takes some doing. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to young authors, because the flip side is far more likely and far more dangerous, where you've got, this thing that doesn't really fit, and you keep trying to force it in. Like that's what often happens. But I think if you've got enough of a sense of your story and the tap dance that is required to weave things in just so, you can take those darlings and put them maybe somewhere later in the book, maybe somewhere earlier in the book. But when it comes right down to it, it's the overall story that matters the most, and I will cut those things out. In fact, I have an entire file that's called Clipped Crap. The program that I use is called Scrivener, and Scrivener can have several different panes up to be working on, and one of those files, those sort of like panes that are on the windows that are on there, is called Clip Crap. And every time I'll get to something that is really beautifully written but just doesn't fit, I will take it and I will put it in Clip Crap, and I'll be like, you know what? It's there. If I want it, I can go back and get it. I can go back and get it and put it back in. I don't have to just delete it and then be worried that I deleted the amazing thing, the one brilliant thing in the book. I just cut it out, right? I put it in the Clip Crap file, and then if I need to, I go back and I pull from it and I take it and I use it. And out of the 100 times I've done something like this, I may have gone back to Clipped Crap and pulled something out once. Not very often does that happen. Usually whatever I wanted to say comes out in a different way. Maybe that thing that didn't fit in a bulk paragraph right there, I can put one sentence in chapter 1, something else comes up in chapter 5, chapter 32, there's a little bit of it. Like sometimes it will just organically come out anyways, right? If it's really important, it will return to me.
So what was that one darling that you
Oh,
revived?
I can't even remember. I just remember in the early days there was one, maybe two times that I went back and grabbed something and put it back in. It was probably, I mean, if I had to guess, it was probably in the Threadweavers series somewhere. Probably like in God of Dragons. So the Threadweavers is a 4-book series. It starts with this one. I brought them for you so you could see as I talk about these various stories. So this is Wildmane. It's the first in the Threadweavers series, right? And the 4th is God of Dragons. This was supposed to be a trilogy, this series. And I got to the 3rd book, which is Threads of Amerion, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally I'm like, okay, this is not the 3rd book. I cut it in half. That makes the 3rd book a just horrible cliffhanger. It is just a brutal cliffhanger. And then the fourth book wraps everything up. But in that fourth book, one, because I clipped a lot of stuff trying to make it smaller when it was all one volume. And then in that fourth book, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can put this in here now that this is its own volume.
Okay,
That's
okay.
probably the one. Although I don't remember exactly.
Do you know where the idea for your Threadweaver series came from?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. So I mentioned that my parents got divorced when I was 14, right? And we were living in Durango, and my dad went to California, which is where his roots were, and that was where he wanted to start up his new life. And my mom lingered in Durango, Colorado for a little while, and then just couldn't afford to live there, and she left. That was when I was about 16, I want to say.
Mhm.
And when she left, I didn't want to. I'm like, I've got 2 years of high school left. I'm not going to go to a new school in California where I know nobody and try and start up my high school education. That sounds like a nightmare to me. So I was trying to figure out a way to stay in Durango. And one of my good friends, as we were walking downtown, he's like, well, you can stay with me. And I was like, no, I mean, like, I actually have to live somewhere. He's like, and I'm not talking about like a weekend, sleepover or something like that. No, I think that'd be fine. He's like, let me check with my parents. So he checked with his parents, and his parents were like, sure. So I moved into their house my junior year. And when I was there, we would just like on the weekends, it was great. It was like a sleepover every weekend. Like I'd go up to his room and we would play Middle Earth role play. So it was like Dungeons and Dragons, but it was like based on Middle Earth. And we made all kinds of characters, and we would just play like, I mean, these binge playing episode, sessions where we'd start Friday afternoon after school. We would go through Saturday, go through Sunday, and just have these epic stories that we would build. And during one of those stories, this character, Metafe, who's nicknamed Wildmane. He's this like 1,400-year-old demigod and legend that everybody in this fantasy world knows. That's where he was born, in those role-playing sessions. Now, this book takes place 1,400 years after Metafe, Wildmane, became a demigod. He got infused with the crackling energy of this sleeping god that had been attacked by three other gods and stretched out over the entire continent. So Metafe is the descendant of this god from 1,000 years ago, right? Where the god Odandus, mingled his line with this mortal tribe on this island. And then Metafe, 1,000 years later, is part of the royal line of this tribe, right? That the royal line has God's blood in it, I guess, essentially is what I would say. And when he arrives on the continent, this sort of diffused and stretched and almost unsentient energy that is this God focuses on his blood and fills him up, right? So then he becomes immortal, he becomes impossible to kill, he becomes super strong, he becomes all these things, right? He becomes like Hercules, right? And so that was the role-playing session that I did with Marvin. That's the name of my friend that I was staying with. And when I got to college, I reinvented the story. What would Wildmane be like 14 centuries later? And that's this one. That's what this story ended up being. So that's that's the first book that I ever wrote that is still published. I can't remember. I've digressed quite a bit, so I can't remember the original question that you asked, but it was something along those lines.
So, what was the event that caused you to start like reminding yourself of this role play you did when you were 14 in college?
Well, I never stopped thinking about it. I mean, I went from high school. I wandered around for about 3 years, um, and then started going to college. And when I was in college, while I had been wandering around, I had written some other stuff, nothing that ended up getting published later either.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to return to this character because this character, I just love Wildmane's character. He was everything I wanted to be when I was like a 16-year-old kid who was scared of the world, right? Like I didn't have any skills, I didn't have any experience, and my parents had gone to two different parts of California, and I was all alone, sort of. I mean, like the Guymans really took care of me. That was the last name of Marvin's last name. Anyways, his parents really took care of me, but I wanted to be super competent. I wanted to be indestructible. I wanted to be someone that the world couldn't, vanquish. And that's where Wildman came from. That's where that character comes from, is he's this indestructible guy, and his main problem is emotional and psychological. Those are the challenges that he faces. Like he's not got a problem if somebody with a sword tries to kill him. Like it's just not going to happen. He's going to be able to mop the floor with that guy. But there are other things. I mean, you get me started on any of my stories, and I will talk for an hour just about the storyline. I mean, but so I don't want to get into that. But his challenges were psychological and emotional, for sure. So it never left me. And once I got to college, I just wanted to write that story. I wanted to take that character and make it a story that my skills could then serve much better at that point. Because I was a much better writer by the time I got to college than I was when I was in high school.
So what were you studying in college?
So originally I was studying English until I took the cornerstone class of English literature, which was practical criticism, which talked about all of these, I guess they were sort of pseudo-scientific ways of trying to judge writing. There's all these different categories of it. I don't remember that much from it. I didn't get a very good grade in that class. I think I got a C or a B, maybe. But it was all these different ways to try and parse out what would make a great story, and none of them it did not seem practical at all. They called it practical criticism. I would call it impractical criticism. I hated that class. And when I got done with that class, I'm like, wow, if that's the cornerstone class of this major, I do not want to be an English major. I do not. And so I dropped that and became an art studio major. So I actually have a fair hand at doing portraits of people and things like that, though I haven't used it in a long, long time. It's very interesting, the path of a writer. I talk about in this book here, Falling to Fly. This is a memoir of that moment when I was 14 that I told you about, all the way to recently, right? This talks about my attitude and what I discovered in college writing, where it was just like there was so many rules thrown around it, right? And what I wanted to write was not what they respected. In fact, my professor in college said genre fiction is not real fiction. And I was like, I don't understand what that means, right? I mean, either it meant fiction, true fiction, is what academia at large approves of, or it was what that particular professor approved of, which just didn't make any sense. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to buy into that. It wasn't these highfalutin canon authors like Ernest Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald or Toni Morrison that saved my life when I was 14. It was genre fiction that saved my life. So the more stuff like that happened, the more stuff like practical criticism happened, the more I was like, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm going to write genre fiction. And if they want to say, that it's not real fiction, that's fine. I'll go find readers that want to read about dragons and swords and things like that. And they can call me not a real writer if they want. It's fine. Because this is what was important to me when I was growing up. And that's the audience that I'm going to serve now that I'm older, right? So that was my battle with literature and literary writing when I was in college. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some good books that I've read. There's some Ernest Hemingway books that I do like, and I do like Toni Morrison, but that's not the kind of writer that I wanted to be, especially at that time in my life. So that was kind of how that shook out in college. And when that happened, I switched over to art studio, just learned how to draw, learned how to paint, learned how to sculpt, and kept my writing to myself. I didn't want to put it under these cruel hammers of, genre fiction is not real fiction kind of stuff. It's like, well, that's what I want to do. You're not going to convince me. I think, the worst case scenario would be that you do convince me that genre fiction isn't real fiction. And then I decide to write the stuff that I didn't even want to write. So I kind of took it away from academia and just continued writing behind the scenes, because what I wanted to do was write. I didn't have much aspiration to go and be like an author on the New York art scene or anything like that. I wanted to be a writer, but college was kind of hurting me and not helping me. And so I just, started writing behind the scenes, just writing all the stuff that I wanted to do and not showing it to anybody who wasn't interested in that sort of thing, right? And that like one of the things that I talk about in this particular book, Falling to Fly, is the most important advice. Like people come up to me and they ask me, so what advice would you give a young writer starting out? And the advice that I would give a young writer starting out is to write. I know that sounds so obvious as to be a groaner, but it's true. It's true. My friend Becca talks about it like if you want to run a marathon, going and lifting weights in the gym it's good, right? It's good.
Yeah.
You know, you strengthen your muscles, you're lifting your weights in the gym. But if you want to run a marathon, the only way to really get good at running a marathon is to run, you know? So you can study writing how-to books, you can go take classes, you can go to conferences, you could do all that stuff for writing a book. But the best way to learn how to write is to just do it. You know, you find out what your voice is, you find out, the things that have helped me the most learning to write is doing something so much that I become bored of it. And then I come up with a new way to say it, right? So for example, when I was in college, my other writer friends, one of them said to me, you know what? I read this fantasy book of yours and you used the word beautiful 327 times. I counted them. I was like, what? She's like, yeah, this is a crutch for you. This word, like everybody in your world is beautiful. You got to find something different. And I was like, okay. So that kind of kicked me off to thinking about, okay, so if I come upon something, a waterfall or a warrior woman or this dude with like this really cool 5 o'clock shadow, instead of calling them beautiful, how about I come up with something different? And that led to, you know, instead of this beautiful waterfall, it was a waterfall that shot off the top of a cliff and created a cloud of mist as it was falling into the pool below where the droplets rained upward. You know what I mean? Like that's how, and that to me is good writing. Saying something is beautiful over and over and over again is not great writing, right? So, and that is a function of doing it so much that you just get bored with the normal words that you would use to describe something. And so you get more detailed, you get more specific, you get to something that maybe other people haven't seen before because now you're looking at it and you're coming up with exactly what it is that you're seeing in your mind's eye or describing from something that you've seen out into the world.
Do you feel that as a writer, you learn a lot of vocabularies, like expands your, I guess, expression, diction?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, after I've just, lambasted academia, I'm going to go back and give them credit. When I was in high school and in college, one of the exercises that we did was we would learn vocabulary. There was like a very specific, going through and memorizing these words and understanding these words. And I look back on that with such fondness. I really enjoyed it at the time. Like, oh, I never knew that that word meant that. And I never knew that that word meant that. And do I still use those words that was in that vocabulary book when I was a junior in high school? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. So many of the words that I use now to describe things and to write, a lot of them came from that moment when I just started expanding my vocabulary. I mean, that was like the most obvious way to expand your vocabulary, let alone reading a lot of books. When I was reading these fantasy books, give you an example. Piers Anthony wrote these Xanth Chronicles, and Xanth was this magical land that was attached to the land that we all live in, which the Xanthians call Mundania. And I came to find out later that the word mundane is ordinary and boring, right? So he was calling the regular world ordinary and boring in this sort of, clever way that once I looked up the word mundane, I was inside the joke, right? And now I knew the word mundane and would never, ever, ever forget it, right? Because it had been used in a way that was incorporated with a story that I was avidly excited about, right? So that so vocabulary is very important. I mean, there are a lot of tools that writers need, and vocabulary is a huge one. It's a huge one. I mean, knowing grammar is also huge. And a lot of that stuff, though, the most important things about grammar, you learn in high school. I mean, you learn some advanced stuff in college, but most of that you learn in high school. And if you paid attention in high school and you know subject, verb, predicate, all of that stuff that makes up a sentence and why you don't want to use fragment sentences and run-on sentences and where the commas should go and all that stuff, because punctuation can make a huge difference in meaning when you're writing something if you know all of that stuff and you've, like I said, done it so much that it's boring. You also then learn how you can break it effectively. Do I use fragment sentences? Yes, I do. Do I sometimes use alternative placement of commas? Yes, I do. But I do it intentionally, right? If you're doing it and you're not doing it intentionally, people are going to see it and they're going to know you're an amateur. They're going to know.
So do you think writing is subjective?
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, I talk about good writing. When I say that, I mean writing that I like, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, there is no cosmic rubric that defines good writing. And I talked a little bit about that when I was, talking about the practical criticism
Yeah, like
class.
academia, right?
Yeah, where they were trying to make a measuring stick, like you would measure the length of something with a ruler, like science and math. It's real easy to have a measuring stick. It's like, okay, this is a foot long. How do you know? Well, I took this ruler and I measured 12 inches. It's a foot long. Nobody disputes that. So
Yeah.
is this a good book? Well, I took this particular ruler that has all these different bells and whistles and I measured, how much meter there was, how much rhyme there was to this poetry. I measured how many characters and, how much description there was. What? Like, I mean, if it affects the reader, if the reader gets into it and loves it and moves through it, that's my rubric, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I'm not trying to win any, even though I have won awards for writing. I'm not trying to win some approval from some ivory tower academic stamp of approval, right? I'm not trying to win that. What I want to win is the hearts of people who love to read. That's what's important to me. And the hearts of people who love to read, vastly different person to person. Here's one of the things that encouraged me the most well, maybe not the most overall, but like one of the things that really, really encouraged me. My favorite book of all time is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Ironic because it's science fiction and I write fantasy, but love that story. Every time I go back and read it, and I read about once a year, once every year and a half, it always holds up. It is such a great story. And I went on to Goodreads when I was kind of putting my stuff up on Goodreads, and you'd get, 10 5-star reviews, and then somebody would throw in a 3-star review. It's like, nah, this was okay. I'm just like, oh no, everybody has to love it. Please, I went and I looked at Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game. And at the time that I looked at it, it had like 32,000 reviews, right? And it was an average of 4.7 stars or 4.5 stars. But there were 3,000 one-star reviews. 3,000. Now, I mean, I was looking at that going, who in the hell would think that this is a bad book? How could you possibly think my favorite book of all time sucked? And I went and I read all the reviews, and like everybody's got their thing, For some people, it's like, this kid is 6 years old. No way could he be a genius that would do this thing. And I was like, it's science fiction. Like, but it's okay to imagine that a spaceship could take you to like this space station that's spinning, that is creating, things that are going to destroy this invading alien race of bugs. But it's not okay to imagine that a 6-year-old could be brilliant enough to come up with the tactical strategy that nobody else thought of. I mean, like, I just didn't understand that. But to them, it just didn't work. For some people, certain things don't work. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Like, I remember one person, like Wildmane has a bit of a love triangle in it. And, oh no, it's Fairmist. Sorry, Fairmist has a love triangle in it.
Yeah.
And somebody, asked me as I was kind of describing the story to them, like, does this have a love triangle? I'm like, yeah, it does. And they're like, oh, I cannot stand love triangles. And they just walked away from my booth. And I was like, oh. And for a second, of course, always, I think, oh, love triangles are horrible. I should never have done that in the book. But then, like that same day, somebody came up to me and was like, so I love triangles. Do you have anything with a love triangle? I'm like, yes, I do. So I mean, it's totally subjective, as you mentioned. Writing is absolutely subjective, both the genre of the writing and the style of the writing. Remember, I told you about how those long, protracted descriptions in epic fantasy, I was like, I don't like those. I want to move on from them. Some people, that's what they go to get those books for. That's why they want to read epic fantasies, because of those long descriptions. That's what they want. It lets them sink into the world. Take Lord of the Rings, for example. If you've ever read Lord of the Rings, there's a whole section in there with Tom Bombadil. And in fact, if you're reading Rings of Power, there's actually a character they've made that's called Tom Bombadil that's in that show. Tom Bombadil is this really cool sort of aside. The hobbits meet him on their way to Rivendell, and it's not in the movies. So if you watch the movies, you won't see Tom Bombadil in the original Lord of the Rings movies, right? It is 100 pages of this vignette where we go off and we hang out with Tom Bombadil for a while. Some people, that is their favorite part of the Lord of the Rings. All three books, it's their favorite part. Some people, they're like, that is the worst part. Why are we spending and wasting all of this time in the forest of Tom Bombadil when we could be getting onto the action of Sauron and the Ring and, all the heroes? So, I mean, it's just totally subjective, and people will argue about it from now until the end of time, I'm sure. And if you doubt me, just go to any one of the Rings of Power Facebook groups, and you'll see people say, "This is great! I love this series. I get to be in Middle Earth." And then you've got some people that are like, "This is the worst thing ever. They didn't say that in the Silmarillion. It's not the real story. The whole thing should be ejected." It just people will argue about it till the end of time.
You know what? I used to always say this in class. It might just be because I got a bad grade every time in English, but I used to say, like, I swear to God, guys, you can give this to 10 different English teachers and I'll get 10 different, completely different grades.
Yeah. Yep.
True.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's that way with an art form, right?
Mhm.
It's that way with painting. It's that way with drawing, with acting. It all depends on who you're trying to impress and honestly what mood they're in. It could be the same editor that looks at your manuscript on Monday, when they're having a crappy day and they throw you back into the slush pile. It's not good enough that day. And on Friday, when they're excited and they're off to meet their sweetie and have a drink with them after work, and they pick this up and it just charms them. I mean, like, it's really horribly unfair. And it always was. It always has been, and it always will be, probably because it's so subjective. Like, this is an art form where we're trying to capture emotions. And so it completely depends on the person who is picking up your book and reading it. And also, I mean, it's a collaboration, I mean, like, I write the text, but what I write and what somebody reads, those are two different things. They are every time. Right? What I write and John reads versus what I write and, Cynthia reads, like, those are going to be two slightly different stories. Now, a lot of it's going to be the same because the text is bringing them in, but it's their imagination that's filling in all the little cracks when they're reading this. I mean, like, you could say somebody drew his sword in a flash, and one person is going to see somebody who is completely bald and, has like a tank top on and, is running towards the villain. And somebody else is going to see some long flowing haired, hunky guy with no shirt on and, whatever it is, like, they're going to see what they want to see. And that gets down to the most detailed minutia, right? I mean, like, those things are created by the imagination of the reader. So I'm really just kind of like like a tour guide, like a tour guide giving you a tour of, say, Chicago on the rivers that go through Chicago. My wife and I recently last year went to Chicago, and we took the tour where they put you on, this little ferry, and they ferry you around to all the amazing architecture that's in Chicago, right? And there's 100 people on that boat, and what I'm looking at when this guy is talking is not the same as what this guy's looking at when, I mean, even if we're looking at the same building, I could be looking at the the filigree around the windows, and he could be looking at how tall the building is. I mean, we're all going to perceive something different, and writing is the same as that. We're all looking at different things as we're reading this text. Like I said, it's a collaboration between the writer and the reader every time.
Now I have a question on that. Do you think that when you read a book, you're like, oh my God, I have this exact like expectation of how these characters sound and look, and then they make a movie about it, and you're like, this is not what I was thinking in my brain.
Yep. Yep. Tale as old as time, right? I mean, everybody's like, oh, the book is way better than the movie. I think there's only one movie I can think of that was better than the book, and it was better than the book by a hair, and that's The Princess Bride. I mean, The Princess Bride book is actually really good. William Golding, I can't remember the full name, but he also wrote the script for the movie, and the movie
Okay.
it's fantastic, right? I mean, it is a cult classic. They couldn't do that movie any better. But most movies, they deviate from the book in ways that were like, no, I read that and I saw it, a certain way, and now they're portraying it to be something different. Yeah, that's almost every time that happens.
Did you watch the movie for the Ender Game?
Unfortunately, I did. Yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible. And I love Harrison Ford, but they just the way that they chunked it out and the way that what they chose to put, it would be a hard one to make into a movie. And I mean, I would love to see that book as a movie that's done well. But honestly, I think it would have to be a miniseries. They'd have to redo it. They'd have to do it in episodes. And I'm not a big fan of voiceover internal dialogue, but they might have to do that as well. So much of that book. Have you read Ender's Game?
I read it in high school, so it was a
Okay,
long time ago.
long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much of the pivotal points happen in his psyche as we're kind of continuing along. What
Yeah.
he's going through as a child, and I feel like that it's so fraught with peril trying to turn that into a movie. First of all, you got to find a Haley Joel Osment. You got to find somebody who's this young kid who really understands the role, really can play the role, and then show this character arc over time. Um, and so yeah. So I mean, it's a difficult one to translate into a movie. I mean, I know they were talking about Lord of the Rings is really difficult to translate into a movie. They tried and didn't do very well a couple of times before the original, the trilogy that we know as the blockbuster trilogy. And they just navigated that so well. But once upon a time, they didn't have the technical ability to create an orc that looked like an orc. Instead they had somebody looking, running around in a rubber mask looking like an orc, which is bad, right? And so maybe someday they will have something that can create that internal monologue that will help pull readers through the story. I don't know.
How do you feel about the Harry Potter series?
So, um, first of all, just let me put down the caveat that I think it's wonderful that they're out there. I think that the fact that they took that and they put it up on the screen, I'm never going to tell people they shouldn't try and make movies out of books. I love the fact that we can watch it and have this visual representation. That said, the problem that I have with the Harry Potter movies is the first two books, they tried to recreate the book exactly. And that tends to make for a boring movie. And I felt that the pacing of the first two movies were a little pedantic. It was just kind of like, okay, we're going to see this scene that we all love from the book. And so if you wanted to take like a tour of nostalgia where you had a visual that somebody else came up with of these parts of the book is great, right? But as
Yeah.
a movie, like if I've never read the books, as a movie, I just found them kind of slow until the third book. Now the third movie,
Yeah.
also the third book, The Prisoner of Azkaban. I think that's a phenomenal. I think that they adapted it. They were like, okay, there's this X amount of stuff in the book. We're going to strip out some of that stuff. We're going to replace some of that stuff. And we're going to make a movie that is made to be a movie as opposed to a movie that is made to be a tribute to the book. Right. And I mean, I am not a movie maker. So again, I don't want to throw shade on people and art is always difficult. Like even if you are the best writer in the world, and let's say you've written Ender's Game, say you're Orson Scott Card, not every book you write's going to be Ender's Game, right? Not every book you write, there are going to be times where you just miss. You try and you miss, right? And so I hats off to anybody who is doing creative endeavors. I know how hard it is. I know firsthand how hard it is and how you want to hit the bullseye. And sometimes you hit the fourth or fifth ring out from the bullseye. And that's just the way that it goes, right? So sometimes it's just magic that kind of comes together. And if you've ever watched that show on Netflix, The Movies That Made Us, it's like a whole bunch of 80s movies where they show the behind the scenes. Every single one of them is like, this movie was a dumpster fire running down the railroad tracks about to fall into a dirty river until the last moment when all the stuff came together. And then we had, aliens. I mean, then we had this classic iconic movie that came forward, or Home Alone or whatever. I mean, like it's always this disaster that's about to happen. And then somehow magic happens, and it all comes together. So perhaps that's what it was. The first two, maybe they were just trying to hit something and they missed. And then the third one just really worked as a movie for me. I think it's because they decided to kill some of the darlings, right? They decided to serve the story in the format that it was, that they were trying to achieve, which is a movie, and forget about trying to make it exactly perfectly like the book was as they were going through. So, I mean, Lord of the Rings trilogy, they did that as well. They cut a lot of stuff out of that, and I thought they cut the right stuff. It really holds together just as a movie. You can watch those movies never having read the books, and it is a phenomenal ride. And that, I think, is an indicator that they've successfully adapted a story to the screen.
You mentioned how like a lot of things in the books wouldn't work in the movies and vice versa. So what do you think makes movies like good in its like own way and then books good in its own way?
Wow, this is probably sailing beyond the horizon of my expertise. Like I said, I'm not a movie maker, but I think that I can talk about what I think makes an effective impact in stories in prose stories, but
Yeah.
adapting it to a movie like well, I mean, we talked about the internal monologue. That's tough to do well, especially if it's done well in a book, and then to adapt it over. I mean, that's why the book so often is better than the movie, because the book can hook into your emotions through telling you what's going on in a character's head, whereas a movie has to find a way to make that visually representative, or at the very least auditorially um, representative, right? I think that's orally. Anyways, doesn't matter. I probably chose the wrong word for that. Anyways, but like for example, when reading the book "Save the Cat" by Blake Snyder, where he talks about different genres that he kind of classifies movies as. One of the genres is buddy love, right? Where you've got two people, and it can be like Lethal Weapon, where you've got, two guys that are friends that hate each other and then have to come together. Or it can be a romance movie, right? Where you've got guy and a girl trying to come together and they finally do in the end. They hate each other in the beginning. It's the same genre is what he would
Yeah.
say. And what he says about this genre is like, I think this got created right about the time that movies, came out. Like, so for example, one of his other genres is monster in the house. Monster in the house essentially is don't get eaten, right? Like there's something bad in the area or the house that you're in, and you got to escape and not get eaten. Every horror movie ever written or shown is that way. Um, Jaws is that way, except the house is not a house; it's a boat, and you're
Yeah.
surrounded by the waters where the Jaws is. So Monster in the House is old as the hills. Buddy love is not. And the way that what he talks about is like, I think we created this pair of characters so that we have somebody to bounce ideas off of, so that instead of an internal monologue, you have a dialogue between these two characters that can show what's on their mind, right? So instead of saying, I'm kind of scared of going into that dark house alone where I think the villains with the guns are, you say to your buddy, you're like, pretty dark in there. Yeah. What do you think? I think we go in guns blazing. That's a way to solve that problem. So I think that we've come up with clever mechanisms to solve the problem of what can't we do in a movie that we did in a book, and that's an example of one of them, right? But the thing about movies is they're mostly visual and sometimes auditory, right?
Yeah.
But rarely are they like hooking directly into your emotions through sort of a long prose. I mean, they're a long string of prose trying to get you involved that way. It's usually action sequences that are pulling you in, or if they're going to get into the emotion, you're going to see that emotion on the face of the actor. You'll see it in the interaction between the two characters. Love scenes and things like that are examples of that. Or like, where they're across the room from each other and they run at each other, and that's a very emotional moment, but it's a very visual moment also.
Mhm. Which one do you prefer? I mean, I think you prefer books,
Which,
right?
um, you know, I love stories, and I happen to be a craftsman of prose stories. But I watch a ton of movies, a ton of uh, shows on TV, things like that. I just love stories. I love the the emotions that come up when I'm watching a movie, reading a book, listening to a book on audiobooks. I don't know that I can pick a favorite. To me, it's kind of all the same, right? As far as like what echelon they're at. I mean, the books that I love that have hit me really hard, I love them so much because of the way that story, that medium is. Like recently, I just read The Girl with All the Gifts, and I
Or
can't.
yeah.
You've read that one? Oh, what a great freaking book! Have you read the follow up, The Boy on the Bridge?
I have
Okay.
not.
So the girl with all the gifts, magnificent. I love the main character, Melanie. It's just so well done, right? But if you read the second book, it's like, anyways, I wasn't sure about the ending. At the end of that, I was like, It was a very thought provoking ending, right? Well, The Boy on the Bridge is like, I started off the first half of it. I'm like, this is okay. It's certainly worth reading. Like I'm really enjoying being back in the world and that sort of thing. But then the last half, head and shoulders above the first book, just so good. And the way he ends it, I was just like, this is so amazing. So yeah, I recommend that series. Carey is the last name. ML Carey. Can't remember exactly the author on that one. That's bad on me. But fantastic books. Fantastic books. Maybe my favorite books this year that I've read.
You know, some, yeah,
What's
sorry.
that?
I was just gonna say that sometimes I see like books and like the types of stories people come up with. And I'm like, where do you guys think of this? I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think artists have been asked since the beginning of time, where do you get your inspiration from, right? And I think I mean, for me, it's almost this rolling boil, right? Like it's this simmering pot that sometimes is boiling over and sometimes is just simmering. That because so just like anything, the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it, right? An athlete who wants to run really fast needs to practice sprinting, right? Needs to make their muscles strong, needs to continually do that. And the more you do that, the faster you're going to be, the more, up to a certain point, right? Probably with anything, that's the case. And with writing and creativity, which is kind of what we're talking about, I think that the more you do things that are creative, the more your mind comes up with. Like people will oftentimes, young writers will worry, I want to keep this idea. I want to keep it to the very end of the book. I'm like, don't keep the idea. Put it in the book, chapter 1. No, because I want to make sure I have a good thing for the end. I'm like, you will. Trust me, you will. The more you use that, the more you use your good ideas, it's like you're vacating a slot. And once you do, it's like, you don't have enough air in your lungs, so your lungs automatically go and fill it up with more air because that's the way your body works, right? Well, with your imagination, it's the same way. You vacate that spot where you got this really cool idea and you put it out on the page. And now that's not your idea; it's everybody's idea. They're going to fill up that idea again, right? That's the way that my mind works. At least, the more ideas I use, the more ideas I seem to have. It's just it's a rhythm. You start doing it and it just tends to go, right? And I know that there are people that hit writer's block, and I myself have hit writer's block, but I think writer's block happens not because your creativity dries up. I think it happens because of the demons in your head that get in your way. There's any number of demons that will stop a creative from being creative and block them up. But I don't think it's often a lack of creativity. I mean, that's all very subjective. I mean, maybe it's just that I have 1,000 spoons when it comes to creativity, and so it just never seems to go away from me. But I think that creativity tends to be something that you use it or use it or lose it kind of thing. If you use it, more will come. If you don't, it tends to fade. It's like telling your mind what you want from it. And if you just hold on to the one idea and never espouse it and just kind of cling to it, that's the only idea you get. If you use it and wait for the next one and use that, then all of a sudden you got 2, you use both of those. Now you got 4, you use all 4 of those. Boom, it just starts going.
So you're saying it's like a muscle.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm curious, what were you doing until you decided I'm gonna write professionally?
So yeah, I mean, I always wanted to write professionally, even all the way back to high school. But it was one of those, and I think a lot of young writers are like this. Like, I want to write this brilliant book and I'll put it out into the world and everybody's going to know it's brilliant. And someone will come knock on my door and say, we want you to be the next great author. We're going to put this book all over the world. We're going to make movies out of it. That's what we want. Like, that's what I was waiting for until I was about 40, right? And when I
Wow.
was, yeah, when I was like 40, 41, 42, I was like, you know what? If I'm going to make this happen, I have to make this happen. I have to get out into the world, start beating the street, and I probably was, way, way late in that. I probably should have started doing that when I was in my 20s, but doesn't matter when it happens. That's when I turned the page on it. And that's when I started writing the bulk of what you see now. And just started getting my books out there my way. And what I've learned about that is that that's probably also what's going to open the door to some potential angel from on high coming down and going, we want you, right? You do that work, you put in that work, you bust your hump to get out there, get your stories out there, whether that's through trad publishing where you're romancing agents or romancing editors to try and get into that mechanism, or whether it's indie publishing where you're going out and you're meeting readers face to face, putting your stuff up, promoting your stuff, marketing your stuff, all that stuff, where you're putting in the work, dedicating yourself to your stories, that's when luck starts to happen. And I don't think it's luck. I think it's, you put in the work, you put in the hours, and people start to notice that you are creating good product. And then you start to build a fan base and everything follows that. Like I said, the readers are the most important. They don't make movies of things that nobody likes. They make movies of things that millions of people were like, this is a fantastic book. And then they make a movie of it, right?
Mhm. And also, people don't realize that 90% of the stuff that they saw as a movie on screen is like books that's been out for ages.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, take Lord of the Rings, for example. I mean, I think it was out for half a century before they even started doing, little cartoons like The Hobbit, let alone the big trilogy that we all know as Lord of the Rings. I mean, when was Lord of the Rings published? Like 45, 46, 47? And it's old. It is old, right? And the movies came out in what, 2000s? When did those
Yeah.
come out? Like 2003, 4, 5, something like that. So I mean, that's like more than half a century before they made a movie of that. So yeah, and I mean that's encouraging in a way too. That like you can put something out and it slow boils over time. Dune, another fantastic example. That
Oh,
thing.
Dune's even older. Isn't like was it Ancestors of Sci-Fi or something? Like,
Yeah, well, it's probably not older than Lord of the Rings. I think that one was written in the 60s, I want to say, maybe the 70s, but probably the 60s. I can't remember when Dune was written. But I know that it made the rounds at publishers for years getting rejected. I think it was like 52 rejections that it got, something like that. I'm probably misquoting. Math is not my strong suit, so please forgive me if I have the wrong number there. But it's definitely more than a couple dozen times that it got rejected, where, and then somebody finally took a chance on it, and boom, it became a classic bit of science fiction. That's, I think, what gives hope to me and lots of writers that, like, have not been lionized yet by by history, where it's like, you could have a story that's just floating around for a long time, and then all of a sudden everybody thinks it's the best thing ever. Or perhaps it's just that the fan base was slowly rising all this time, and it gets to some critical mass, and then boom, everybody needs to know. Oh, a great example of that is it's a cartoon. Oh gosh, no, I'm not thinking. It's got Luffy is the main character's name.
One Piece, One Piece, One Piece.
One Piece. Yeah. So that guy, I mean, he's been making this show on his own for how many years? I mean, like a decade. And then what, 2 years ago, all of a sudden, it's the rage, right?
Yeah.
The overnight success only took 30 years, but I mean, I don't know how long he's been doing that show, but I know there's like, what, 1,200 episodes. So it's been a long time that he's been doing this, and I think he's, and he essentially said, and I'm going to do it till the day I die. It's like, more power to you, dude. But now it's like everybody knows One Piece. Everybody's seen it at cons. I see that character Luffy cosplayed all over the place. So it's, maybe even now more than ever, it takes a while to kind of sink into the ground, as an artist, have your raindrops falling for years and years and years, and finally, something starts to grow from them. And you just never know. You just never know when that's going to happen. That's kind of one of the exciting things about being a creative, I think.
I kind of have I'm not sure if I heard this correctly, but I remember listening to a podcast by, Robert Kirkman.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I think he was saying how Walking Dead got rejected a couple times, and he
Hmm.
would repitch it using a different name every single time, and that was so
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, yeah. My friend Doug Wagner is a good friend of Robert Kirkman, and he was telling me some behind the scenes stories where it's like, they wanted to do it this way, and he was like, nope, not going to do it that way, and had like 2 mortgages out on his house or something, and like just really like living at this subsistence level, but staying true to the story that he loved. He didn't want it to go out into the world in a way that it wasn't that way. And I think it had to do with the show The Walking Dead. I think he wanted to be a part of the creative team that made sure that it shaped it the right way. And he held out for that, like he had other interests, but they wanted to take the power of decision making away from him. And he's like, nope, nope, even though he didn't have any money, it's like they wanted to pay you, hundreds of thousands of dollars to take this property. I mean, that's what's that's fortitude, that's loyalty to your project to be able to do that and valuing what you've done. So many authors don't value what they've done, and they see it as, oh well, I'm supposed to give away the rights to this particular story because that's just the way it goes, right? But that's an example of a guy who held on to his rights, and now he's got as much money as he needs, it seems to me. I mean, like, I don't know him really, I've never met him in person, but I just know stories of him. But it seems to me that he made the right choice, and now he's in control of that ship. He gets to make the decisions on that, and that's great. That's a happy ending story for an artist. There are so many not happy ending stories for artists.
Do you have any like ambitious dreams for your books?
Oh, of course. I mean, I'd love to see all of my books in movies. It'd be really cool. Like this one here, Khyven the Unkillable is my most recently completed series, and it's won awards, as you can see on here, and just has a really fantastic following for this particular story, and it's very very visual. Like I said, edge of your seat epic fantasy is my brand, and I could totally see Khyven, who's a ringer. He's a gladiator essentially. Strolling into the ring. They could do stuff with the lighting where it goes from this dark chamber into the light, and you see these five doorways in there that go into noctums, and then this creature that they've enticed out of the noctum that is this phenomenal beast of a cat monster that he has to defeat with a wooden sword. Come on, tell me that wouldn't play in Hollywood. There's so many good scenes in this. I'd love to see this as a movie for sure. So that's one of my dreams, is to have these stories become movies or series, on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that would be really cool. Um, and then also, to just hit that zeitgeist. I think that a lot of artists, especially indie artists and writers, are out there just hitting singles, to use a sports metaphor. So they hit the ball, they run to first base, and then hit the ball, run to second base, and they're just constantly working. But every now and then, you get this moment where all of a sudden what you're doing and what you've been doing for years is the popular thing. Kind of like One Piece, right? Where all of a sudden everybody loves this thing, and your book gets carried up on this tide, and that's the home run, where you go out and you're hitting, you've hit 115 singles, and all of a sudden, crack, you hit a home run, and your money problems are not money problems anymore, and you're going all over the country, talking about this book. I have a friend, Matt Dinneman, who wrote Dungeon Crawler Carl, and he had some success with it as an indie author. I mean, certainly the audiobooks were really popular, but it hadn't hit that zeitgeist yet. But it has now. Like, you mark my words, you're going to see a Dungeon Crawler Carl movie. You're going to see, I've been to, so here's the thing. He got recently a publishing contract to do the printed books, and they took the printed books and they distributed them everywhere, right? And so this last year, he's been kind of cruising around doing signings at various cons. And as you know, I go to a lot of cons, and so I've been at several of these cons that he's been signing at, Dragonsteel, Emerald City Comic Con, and to watch he just kind of, I mean, it's different. I come in, I bring all my books, I do all my setup. He just strolls in. They've already got the setup, and they've got a line around the convention center. And first day, both times that I've been at a con with him, sold out. There's all the books are just gone. Like, there's all these people hanging in line, getting ready to get their book signed that they already have and buy the new one, whatever it is, and they sell out that same day. It's just crazy. It is going great guns for him. It's so fun to see that. So sometimes it hits like that, and that would be really cool. That's a dream of mine. It'd be nice to hit that zeitgeist and have everybody be like, "Oh my gosh, Khyven the Unkillable! It's the best epic fantasy book that's come along in 10 years." That would be fun to see. But I think until then, you serve the readers that love what you do, and there's a lot of them that do love what I do, and so the stuff that I'm doing, the writing that I'm doing, it's for them. That's why I'm doing it. That's why I keep doing it. Well, I mean, it's always been for me as well, because I love doing it. But I want to serve that readership that's out there. And if ever that readership goes from 1,000 people to 1,000,000 people, that'd be cool.
Yes. I hope that happens to me too. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, right.
I'm kind of hoping, I keep telling myself like it's okay because all these people that I look up to had a phase where they weren't popular. So someday it's gonna happen to me too. That's what I keep telling myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just imagine Frank Herbert with Dune. Imagine what he must have thought of his book after he peddled it around to, dozens of publishers, all of whom said no. Like, where did he summon the strength to keep trying? It's like, wow. I mean, how many publishers are there, especially back in the 1960s? What, 10? And so he must have just been making the rounds to different editors within those publishing houses, trying to find somebody that would take a chance on this book. And now it is, it's part of our canon of science fiction. Like, everybody knows Dune. And that's the way it goes. You keep persevering. You do it because you love it, and you hope that somebody someday, there will be a huge audience that loves it also, right?
So what was your game plan to be a professional when you started deciding?
Oh, it's changed so many times. I mean, I think that in the beginning, like I said, my game plan was to just have an angel descend and say, "You are the best new author
Chosen
I've ever seen."
one.
Exactly. You are the chosen one. And then at one point I just kind of was like, you know what? If I am not going to get that, multi-million dollar book contract, then I'm going to find a way to keep writing anyways. I'm going to find a way to make this my lifestyle. And I have done that since 2017. I've been full-time writing. And I'm not making millions of dollars yet, but I make enough to, like I said, cruise around the country, keep writing the books, keep affording the artists that make the covers for my books, keep putting them together, buying them, purchasing them, selling them. All of that stuff is now my life, and I love it. I love it. Right. So that's, I think there was a phase where I went from somebody's going to find me to then I'm going to go out and find an agent, which I did, to then, I'm going to be an indie and push this myself. Those were kind of the three phases for me.
So is it any different from self-publishing?
No, it's the same. Yeah.
Okay.
Those are two phrases for the same thing.
But you're doing such a good job. So,
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that the publishing industry these days is like the wild, wild west. It's like everybody's kind of making their little city out in the West, and whether it grows or dies and becomes a ghost town is largely up to the author that's pushing it and how hard they're pushing, right? So, and there's a myriad of ways to become successful. If you've ever gone to the site or the Facebook group 20 books to 50K, like this was birthed by Michael Anderle and Craig Martell, and essentially they said if you could write 20 books, you could make $50,000 a year off them, going through Amazon, selling ebooks, using advertising on Amazon, on Facebook, that sort of thing. And they have done it and then some several times over. And lots of people have done that method and created an audience for themselves and made great money. I mean, better money than the traditional publishing path could make you, even back in the day when there was no indie publishing. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that they're making, right? Some of them. And this path that I'm doing is kind of the opposite. Like, I'm not focusing online, I'm focusing face to face with people, but it's going up every single year, and so there's certainly another way, a hybrid of both of those, some other avenue to find your readers, and now it might be kind of flipping back to, go to your local bookstores, get connected with your local bookstores. I mean, the key is finding the fans. You find your fans and you steward your fans, and they are the ones that can make you can help you hit that zeitgeist. It's the only thing that ever has. It's always the fans. I mean, you've seen things that have been attemptedly pushed by, say, corporate America. It's like, oh, we're going to take this artist and we're going to make them the next big thing. And it may work every now and then, but most of the time it flops. It's like, oh, this is what we think the viewership ought to see, or the readership ought to see, and they push that particular book. And more often than not, that does not work, because it's not the corporate decision makers that decide what is the good book. It's the readers that decide what is the good book and what they want to read. For example, lit RPG, which is the genre that my friend Matt Dinneman is in with Dungeon Crawler Carl, right? Like, when that first came out, people were like, that's a crap genre. Like, that's never going to fly. Right? Yeah. I mean, that's how it happens. I mean, art that turns into something that makes a crater in our cultural memory oftentimes was poo-pooed by the people who knew what they were talking about when it first came out. Star Wars. Let's talk about Star Wars for a second. I mean, when freaking George Lucas finished, his Star Wars movie that had gone over budget by X amount and was having all kinds of struggles, to get out into the world, and people were like, sorry, man, like this is going to be the end of your career. Like it's never going to fly. And well, at least you had American Graffiti, because he was the director of American Graffiti also before that. Like at least you had that one. That one was fairly well received. And then, of course, Star Wars came out and blew away every single expectation that could possibly have had, let alone the naysayers that said it was going to be a flop, right? And that's because nothing like Star Wars had been out before. So nobody had any measuring stick to say, oh, it's going to work because of this, 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 and this. No, it found its audience, it created its audience and became the only one of its kind. Right? Like that's how it happens. And so to be the only one of its kind up to that point, of course it's not going to look like what's come before. I mean, that's goes without saying, right? So never, I mean, I think never count yourself out. You do what you love, you find the people that love it also, and you connect to them. And that's the way it happens, and it may go slow, that slow burn we were talking about, like with One Piece, or it may be you put it out like Ready Player One, and all of a sudden it just boom, that was what people wanted to see at that moment. It's like, wow, it's part 1980s nostalgia and part, post-apocalyptic America where we're all living inside a computer. Wow. I mean, like it does happen. Or The Martian was another one where, he was just dinking around with that because he liked the idea of Mars. He just liked all this Mars trivia. And he's like, what would it be like if somebody was stranded on Mars? And, I heard the story that he put it up on his website, chapter at a time. And finally, like so many people were addicted to it, friends, family, and the people that they pulled in to read it. They're like, dude, you have got to put this in a format that doesn't suck. It really sucks to read it off your website. Can you just put it in an ebook and put it up on Amazon? And so he's like, sure. And he figured out how to do that, put it in an ebook, put it up on Amazon. And, and it sold like 100,000 copies. It was like once people could access it, and he tried to put it up for free, but Amazon wouldn't let him put it up for free, because he was putting it up for free on his website. So he tried to put it up for free, it wouldn't go up for free, put it up for 99 cents, and boom, it just took off. And then he's getting calls from Sony Pictures, and he's getting calls from, I don't remember the publisher that finally picked him up. And that's how it took off. So it can happen that way too. But again, it was, he had a heart space for it. He wanted to do this thing that had all this Mars trivia in it, and it made something unique that people hadn't seen before. And I can only imagine what Ernest Cline was thinking about with Ready Player One. I mean, clearly he likes the 80s, right? Because it was all, this 80s trivia stuff that's throughout the whole book and the movie. And they did it differently. The trivia bits in the movie are not the same trivia bits in the book. But I love both the movie and the book. That's one where I feel like the book and the movie are about as good as each other, but in different ways. Like they're not the same. The movie was clearly adapted, but it holds up well as a movie. Sorry. Like I said, I can talk about this stuff all day long. I just go and go and go. I love those stories.
I think there's an audience for everything, even
For
the
sure.
weird, and even the cool stuff, weird stuff, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, don't hesitate. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, your LGBTQ book will never fly, or your non-LGBTQ book will never fly. I mean, like there's
I've
just,
heard both.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had people come up to my table and say, are there any LGBTQ references in this? And I never know, it's like, I don't know how he's going to respond. Like, yes, there are. I'm like, well, then I'm not going to read it. Or yes, there are. Oh, well, absolutely. Then I want to read it. Like I said, like we were talking about earlier, it's so subjective, right? It's just so subjective.
So, Todd, if you were to give one advice, I know you already answered this kind of, but if you were to give advice to the people watching this right now, the aspiring storytellers, what would you say?
Right. I mean, that's my first and my go-to. I know I mentioned that earlier, but I'm not kidding about that. Don't let the demons get you down. There's so many demons in your head that will try and stop you. Don't let them stop you. Get up in the morning. I mean, don't let the demon of, oh, I don't have enough time before I go to work. Nope. I wrote an entire novel when I had a 60 to 80 hour a week job, just by doing 30 minutes a morning, 30 minutes a morning, just sitting down, typing out the words, even if it's only one sentence, right. The next thing I would say is, develop selective ignorance. We talk about the word ignorance, and it's usually a bad thing. Selective ignorance is choosing to ignore the things that are stopping you from doing what's important. And have you ever seen that? There's this chart that they have that's like labeled non-important, important, non-urgent, and urgent, right? And so you can have something that's important and urgent, and people tend to do those things, right? But people also tend to do the non-important urgent things because they're urgent, right? And the important non-urgent things tend to be the neglected stepchild, right? But the important things are important, and you have to make room for them. So if people are telling you, oh, well, fantasy just isn't selling anymore, or the market is too flooded, you'll never make your place in this, or you're gonna waste your life and never make any money, or whatever. I mean, like, believe me, these demons have assailed me my whole life. But if you want to be a writer, sit down and do it. Just do it. You have enough education, you have enough time, you have enough opportunity for it to get out into the world. This is the most amazing time for writers that has ever existed. If you have just a handful of drive and a manuscript, you can put your book out into the world. You can make it look like what you want it to look like. You can make it be what you want it to be. And all it takes is, putting in the hours and putting in the time to get it out there. Now, that said, if you are afraid of hard work, do not become a creative, or do not become an artist of any stripe. It's not the easy path to think it is. It's not like, oh, I spat out this book and now I have millions of dollars. Like, you probably will have to work at it a lot before you get to that stage. But if you're willing to work hard, it's possible. It is possible. I've seen it happen. I've seen lightning strike. I've seen people lift themselves up by just hammering again and again and again at that wall. It happens. It does. You can do it too.
If there's a will, there's a way, guys.
Exactly.
That's what my dad says all the time.
It's a great, great colloquialism.
And where can our awesome listeners find your work, Todd?
Yeah. So my name, toddfahnestock.com. Just, no spaces, no periods, just www.toddfahnestock.com. That's my website. You can buy things straight off my website. You want to get something signed straight from me, you can get it on the website. And the ebooks are is more money for me, cheaper for you. Then you'll find them on other sites, Amazon and that sort of thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can find them on Amazon, and if that's your thing, buy them there. But you can also get them on my website, as well as audiobooks.
And you probably click in the link because I probably put it in there. Hopefully.
Outstanding.
Yes. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. Thank you so much, Todd, for joining us and sharing your amazing insights. I was mesmerized like 90% of the time. So that was so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. It's been so great to talk to you.
That's so good. I'm so glad. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow storytelling enthusiasts. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.